What's up, summoners? King Blair here. With more and more people farming Caides Hunt, I want to talk about each of the sets and where could you use these sets and who these sets are good for, so you can decide if you want to farm Caides, as well as answering the question, why are people even farming Caides and when should you be farming Caides? So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server, link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. As always, you guys know that I'm going to break it up into sections so you can skip around for each of the individual sets and discussion topics. You can see that in the bar. But what we're going to be talking about is first, why are people farming it? When should you be farming it? Then we're going to talk about the actual sets, what it does, whether it's good or not, in the case of penetration set being the best, things like injury and revenge not being so good, but then why is it bad and who can use it, if at all, right? So let's just jump right into it. Starting with the question, why are people even starting to farm the set? Why are people becoming more interested in Caides? Caides is not a particularly fun hunt to actually farm, right? The hunt is extremely slow. One of the slower hunts to actually find, if not the slowest, and it is extremely hard to actually get a one-shot team, right? And it's a very high resource intensive hunt. This hunt offers a penetration set that will, as we'll talk about later, is arguably the best set for damage for a lot of heroes, particularly single target heroes. And that value alone of that extra damage is enough for a lot of players to decide to farm it. Now, as far as to when and what time should you be farming it, if you're an early game to even mid to even early late game player, you should still not even really be looking at Caides Hunt. Why do I say that? Well, you're going to get a lot more value out of farming Wyvern and Banshee because they're the more general hunts, and you're still at a point where you don't have that much good gear, where the extra optimization that a penetration set provides you is going to make that big of a difference for your units, right? This is a much more specialized hunt, and if you're still at that early phases, you don't have that a lot of units build, you're not even trying very high competitively for PvP, it's better if you just continue to farm Banshee and Wyvern. And I know even late game players that have made Legend several times or gotten close to hitting Legend, that they never touch Caides because they said, you know, more time in Wyvern equals more speed gear, right? And they never touched it, although there's just as many Legend level players that are farming Caides and having a lot of success with it and transitioning over to farming a lot more Caides. So with that out of the way, knowing that it's more of a late game PvP focused hunt, what do the sets provide? What's the value added to your account by you farming this? Well, that's going to be the first one we're going to talk about, is going to be the penetration set. Because you're farming Caides, you're basically farming for penetration. So why penetration set? What does it do? Well, at its core, penetration set allows you to ignore 15% of the enemy's defense when you are doing a single target damage attack. That's a big classification because it does restrict it to the units that can use it. Now, what are some units that could theoretically use this? Well, think of units like Apocalypse Ravi, things like Violet, Rylet, Little Queen Charlotte, right? Or even things like Rimuru that are seeing more play. And even people are testing around with units like Senya. There's people that are testing it with Kisei, top model Luluka. Any unit that has a really good single target damaging skill, they're going to want to see that pensive. And the thing is that the damage and what it's competing with make it worth it. So what's the set competing against? It is going to be a 2-piece set, and you can't stack it, so you can only put the 2. That is going to be competing with something like a crit set or with an immunity set. Those are the 2 biggest competitors that your C-Pen set actually go against. Against crit rate, stat for stat, you're doing more damage by having this set than a crit set, even with the added stats. And if you don't believe me, we will do some calculations real quick for you guys in damage calculator so you can see what I mean by that. And as far as immunity set, right now we're moving to a zone where a lot of things are able to strip. And if you're something that's not particularly a slow bruiser, right? If you're not someone that's like below 200 speed, immunity is not as required as it used to be in the past, right? You don't particularly have to have immunity anymore at those lower, at those higher speed tiers, right? Especially if you're opening turn 1, you don't have to have that immunity. Of course, if you're playing someone like Rem, Seaside Bologna, you know, those really slow bruisers, immunity is a must-have, right? Immunity is still incredibly important for those slower units. But again, those units don't particularly benefit for penetration set, right? So for the most part, it is worth it. But if you still don't believe me, let's actually look at the calculations so you guys can see how much damage it actually adds. So let's take a look at this Ravi that I put here. I made a pretty standard Apocalypse Ravi, you know, 2000 attack, 300 crit damage, and around 21,000 HP, right? Pretty standard Ravi. Right now, her S1 is doing 5,742, right? Pretty decent damage. Nothing too crazy, right? But let's add the penetration set, and you can see that you get a jump in damage, and it's against a bruiser, right? of around 800, right? And for some of the other skills, it goes up a lot more, right? Depending on how much more damage it does. You see that for the higher damage skill, right? For that soul burn, you're doing 1,400 more damage, right? It's a certain percentage extra. It's around the 15% extra damage, right? It's just a raw 15% damage increase to your single target damage. But now you may be saying, hey, King Blair, you're forgetting about the stat losses, right? Well, for crit save, you're losing an equivalent of about 2.5-ish rolls, which would be equivalent of about 20% attack, right? So you're losing about 20% attack, right? So if you lose 20% of attack or HP, let's say HP because it's more effective for a Ravi. A Ravi's base is like 700, so 20% of 7k, it's around 1,400. So that would put her down at like 1,900, right? So I'll put her on like 1,900, and we'll make it even extra than just the 20% loss. You're still doing way more damage, right? And you could even drop the attack by like 200, right? If you still don't believe me, you're still doing way more damage than you are with those extra stats, right? And you can play around with the damage calculator. I will link it in the description if you do want to see it. But even dropping the attack to like 1,800, you're still doing more damage than you initially were, right? So not only did we take off 2,000 HP, not only did we take off 200 attack, we're still doing more damage than we would if we had a crit set, right? It's a very significant margin, right? It's an extra 15% damage that stat-wise, you're not going to be getting that as easily, right? So again, penetration set through and through is extremely, extremely worth it for any single target damage dealer, especially a Ravi, Violet, Little Queen Charlotte. There's a lot of different ones, and essentially if they have a single target damaging skill that's really strong and you want it to kill, then it's a good unit to put it on. There's a lot more units I can talk about. You can talk about Ilnov to an extent, Charles if you still use Charles, Chu if you still use Chu, Luna. There are so many units in this game, Sermia even, that just benefit from that penetration set. One thing to note though is for someone like Rylet, right, who already has penetration on his skill like an S3, there is a very interesting interaction with penetration set. You don't get the straight damage increase on the S3 because penetration is not additive. So if you don't know what that means, it means that because, oh, this penetrates 50%, you have 15%, 65%, right? No, it's not quite that because it goes more multiplicatively. What that means, if a unit has 1,000 defense against Rylet, he cuts the defense to 500, and then the 15% extra gets added on top. So it jumps at 15% of 500. It's much lower than 15% of 1,000, and that's what the drop would be. It's still giving you a lot extra damage. It's still definitely worth it, but don't expect like some insane damage with units that already penetrate defense. Just something to point out. But again, it still adds a lot of extra damage. But now let's move on to the next set, which is going to be none other than the injury set. And injury is going to be a little bit more of an interesting one because there's a very interesting conundrum with this set. So the thing about injury set is inherently injury is a bad mechanic, right? Why do I say that? Well, what injury does is essentially is it lowers the target's max health by 6% if you do that amount of damage, and that means that they just essentially lose that HP forever. They change the HP to what they are, and it can stack up all the way to 50%. So why do I say that this is normally not a good set or not a good mechanic? Well, a lot of the times it takes way too long for this to actually start mattering. Most fights right now in Epic 7 are quite quick. After 2 to 3 rotations of your units, you're gonna have the fight ending, right? Then the fight's already over. 2 to 3 rotations, that means you reduce the HP by 1,800 or 18%, right? It's less than 18% because it's, again, multiplicatively. Because if you had a unit that's 10,000 HP, you lower by 6%. The 6% of the lowered 6%, it's a lot lower, right? So it's really slow to stack to the point where a lot of the times, by the time the injury starts mattering, the fight's already decided, right? But, and this is a big but, there is an exception. And those are units that can reliably stack injury. Right now in the game, there are only 2 units that can realistically use this set. You could argue for 3, but only really 2 units can actually use this set. One of those being Belian. Why is Belian good? All her skills are AoE, and she has access to Elric Sword. If she procs Aura Sword, she kind of cheats the system by being able to attack when it's not her turn, and it's an AoE attack. The other thing is that her S1 extra skill resets the 6% maximum, meaning you can do way more injury in one turn, like 10% turn 1. Whereas without getting that extra turn, you're only doing 6%, right? So you can do way more injury. And you actually counter things like Rwana that may counter her counterattack variant. Well, with injury, you actually do a really good job with Reliant. And a lot of people actually say that might be her optimal set, just because of how much damage you're able to pump out and how reliably you're able to apply injury, where it actually starts mattering and it actually lets you beat tank teams that you normally would not be able to with Reliant, right? So Reliant, one exception to the rule that injury sucks, and the other exception is going to be Seaside, for the same thing and the same reason that Belian is really good on injury. Because Seaside can cheat by taking turns when it's not her turn, and her skills are mostly AoE, which means she's pumping out that injury damage, and it makes the Rwana matchup not as bad of a counter, right? So again, injury set, very specific. There are some other units you could argue for. Things like Purgis, you can maybe argue. Maybe even Mort, since Mort can actually use an injury set, right? So you could argue for other units, but those are going to be the big ones. But inherently, injury set is one of the worst sets. It is one of the worst pieces. Again, we don't know what units we're getting in the future, so it's always nice to have. But units that can do AoE consistently and reliably are good candidates for injury set. If someone like Charlotte could counterattack AoE, she would probably be on like injury set, right? Things of that nature, right? That's why we would mostly use it. But again, something like Mort potentially could use it, right? And there's some other fun units you could potentially use it on. But for the most part, those are the only two that's actually a good set for. And then last, but definitely not least, we have Revenge Set. Now, Revenge Set gets a little bit of a bad rep because people call it worst speed set. And while that is kind of true to some extent, it is not true for all heroes. So what does Revenge Set do? Essentially, it gives you 12% speed like Speed Set does. That's 13 speed that you're losing, which is a lot. But for every 1 health that you lose, you get an additional 0.5% speed. Now, what this means is in a game, for you to get to the same level as a speed set, right? You need an extra 13%, right? So that's going to mean that for you to get to that point, you have to be at around 75% health for a Revenge Set to start being better than a speed set. And I might have done that math wrong. Let me think, because you need 13% to actually just match speed set, right? So 0.5, 13%, 26, yeah, 75, about 75%. Anything once you're below 75% health, Revenge Sets actually starts being better than Speed Set in a fight. The only problem with this is that you're giving up that turn 1 advantage, right? Versus a Speed Set. So whereas Speed Set guarantees you turn 1 and gives you that initial speed, this is better for longer fights for heroes that can last a long time, right? But you may be thinking, man, a lot of this is based on my opponent and my opponent trying to do damage to my units, so who could use this? Well, there's few units, and I'm going to name a couple of them, and maybe you'll have better ideas, but units that inherently are tanky and don't necessarily take turn 1. What are some examples? Well of Light is a really good example of a unit that very much benefits from the set. Why? She's usually sticking on the board for a pretty long time, and she usually gets hit quite a lot, right? And she's tanks quite a bit. And late game, where cycling your skills is extremely important for Royal Light, if you're actually able to lower your health, and you're going to be below like 50% a lot of the times, you're going to be able to cycle the opponent a little bit faster and potentially get the win. The other unit, which is a unit that a lot of people are actually testing it on as one of his optimal sets, is actually Crow. Why? Aureus. And any Aureus Knights to an extent can make use of Revenge Set. Why? Your opponent has to do damage. They're going to fall below 75% threshold, which means you're going to have a faster unit cycling more as the fight goes on, right? So very nice. Very nice addition, right? For Aureus Knights. That is tremendous, right? That helps a significant amount for those Aureus Knights to actually be able to cycle their skills better, right? So those are going to be the big ones. I know you may be thinking right now, can I do BBK, right? Does that stack? Well, unfortunately, it does not take into consideration bonus speed. What that means is that whenever BBK is passive, this acts on her speed, but it does not stack with the set, right? Which means that technically a speed set is going to be better because that extra speed that you're going to be gaining, you're going to have a higher speed coming into the fight where this can actually stack with that speed set, whereas the extra added speed from Revenge set is not going to add on top. So no, it doesn't work on BBK. I know in theory it sounds really cool. It doesn't work. People have tested it. People have tried it. It's just use speed set at that point. But yeah, that's going to be it for the sets. So overall, Caides Hunt, really, really specific. If you're farming it, you are farming it for the penetration set. And that's something you have to go in accepting. And because of that, I do not recommend it for early game to mid game to even early late game players, because the value lost is way too big for your account at this point, right? You still need to build all those core heroes. You still need to be building your core teams. And something like Crit Set is going to help you a lot easier to actually build those heroes, where this actually becomes more optimized for higher level PvP. So that's all I got for you guys today. Hopefully this helped understand the sets better and whether or not you should farm it. And yeah, that's all I got for you guys, and I will see you next time. Peace.